Pants and the women who wear them. I'm not a fashion historian, but I find the clothes of an era interesting, along with the differences between eras and how each developed. As I was poking around old newspapers looking for a new video topic, I stumbled across an article about women wearing trousers and how that was frowned upon. Big time. I did vaguely know of this, but the more I dug, the more I couldn't believe just how very frowned upon it was. What I intended to be a roll your eyes and scoff at the good old days kind of video, instead it ticked me off. Oh, believe me, there was much to be angry about in those times, and no, the days weren't all good, but this kind of surprised me. This is not a deep dive, but rather a dunk your head and swish around a bit in a puddle and see what sticks. So grab your nearest pair of trousers, button and zip them up because we're proper people, and let's fall down this rabbit hole. 1894. Back in this time period, trousers were just fine. If you were at home, or perhaps if you were calling on a fellow female friend who, I'm assuming, needed to live like right next door to you. Some of these housebound trousers are a very loose version that could almost be thought of what some would call secret pants, but of the long variety. Some are gathered at the ankles, like I guess what could be called harem pants. Some are in very fashionable colors, but only gals will ever see these, at least according to this newspaper. One fashionista declared, quote, "I always wear trousers in my own room. They are so much more comfortable than loose wrappers. No matter how broad-minded a girl may be, she must bow her head to proprieties dictated," end quote. So it's understood that you can wear the trousers, but at home. However, a couple in New Zealand who collaborated and wrote a book called Dress Reform and What It Implies were married in clothing that was not the norm. The bride wore knickerbockers and a vest, a wreath of jasmine, and no gloves. Oh, my goodness. But yeah, that was actually not the norm. The bridesmaid wore a suit of cream silk and a lace collar. It's interesting to see what women did to buck tradition and attempt to change fashion in whatever way they could. The Daily Kennebec Journal, February 24th, 1899, quote, "The best argument in favor of women wearing trousers is that they aren't bow-legged like men," end quote. Okay. 1901, article by Daisy May, who appears to be a society gal and regular columnist. She was in Newport, Rhode Island for a wedding of a Vanderbilt, and while telling bits and pieces of news from that, she spilled the beans, quote, "Women are wearing trousers. I'm told they are the most comfortable garments women ever wore. At this moment, I am due to try on my first pair," end quote. 1910, Governor Stubbs of Kansas received a letter from a widow asking his permission for her to wear men's pants while she was working at home. She's supporting a large family on her own, which means she's also doing outside work, and wearing skirts is getting in the way of her ability to get things done. He turned the letter over to the Attorney General. Yes, can you believe that? The state AG has to look into it. And he ruled that there was no law preventing a woman from wearing men's pants, especially if she was the head of the house. 1911. So that sounds nice and accommodating, but in 1911 Paris, a woman wearing what is called a trouser skirt was surrounded by laughing, jeering men who would not let her by. One of the men even purchased a basket of eggs and handed them out to his male colleagues, and they threw them at her to show their disapproval at her mode of dress, considering it unladylike. The poor woman was finally rescued from the melee by police. The dressmakers of the area didn't see that the style would catch on, that very few orders had come in for those, and those orders were mostly from abroad. Dr. Maud Glasgow, activist for equal rights, among other things, said that if women have to do men's work, they should be able to wear men's clothes. Common sense clothes at that. Quote, "Nothing can be said against it on the ground of immodesty, for there can be nothing more immodest than the present styles. Women seem to have lost all sense of the dignity of dress. Trousers would show a great deal less of the contour of the figure, less of the ankles, and would be more decent than their narrow skirts and low-cut waist," end quote. Mothers Club of Burlingame members asked that Miss Eleanor Sears from Boston please stop wearing pants while riding on horseback through the streets of their town. Miss Sears feels that her costume is the only proper attire for an equestrian, be they man or woman. The question, Has she the right to do as she pleases? The newspaper asked for people to write in with their opinion. Yes, the actions of one young lady caused enough of a hullabaloo to put out an opinion survey. There were a lot of opinions, but I'm going to post one for and one against due to lack of time to give you an idea of the general arguments. Jenny E. Brown said, quote, "Yes, decidedly yes. And why not? Is this not a free country? Is she not decently clad? It is more decent than those of the prevailing fashions and worn by thousands of women on the streets of San Francisco, namely the tube skirt and low-cut waist. To the men of Burlingame, don't look when Miss Sears goes by if it shocks you. Wear your trousers, Miss Sears. California has given women equal rights." End quote. MSM wrote, quote, "We women have taken for our own a great many of man's rights, but let us stop short of wearing trousers. We have the divided skirt for riding and a short skirt for walking, which I find amply fills all wants along that line. I tried wearing trousers while on the ranch, but discarded them with disgust, feeling that anything that detracts from womanly grace, as do trousers, should be shunned. Moreover, any woman wearing trousers cheapens herself in the eyes of the sterner sex. A man does not admire a mannish woman, and what woman of us does not want to be admired? Therefore, let us hold fast to our skirts, letting the men wear their trousers unmolested. Could we see ourselves as others see us, would work well in this case, as in many others. We would not wear the pants." End quote. 1913. Apparently, Montreal had banned tights, so that any ballet company coming to the city to perform would have to bring some alternative clothing along. So the point of this being that if this is happening, and with the suffrage movement taking advancing strides, the idea of a woman wearing pants seems less absurd. A newspaper said, quote, "Suppose someone were to have told you, dear reader, 10 years ago, that hobble skirts would adorn the shapely extremities of half the girls you met in the United States. At least you would have doubted the prophecy. Your grandmother never dreamed that her granddaughters would parade the streets in slashed skirts to the intense delight of the male loungers in front of the clubs and stores. But they're doing it. Everybody's doing it. Then why not to trousers?" End quote. Mr. Hagen said in an interview recently, quote, "Women will be wearing trousers on the street sooner than you imagine." Miss Day said, quote, "I wish the fashion would hurry up and change. Personally, I adore trousers and am anxious to wear them everywhere instead of only upon the stage." End quote. Miss Antoinette Walker, in the stage show The Yellow Jacket, said, quote, "They are 10 times more comfortable than skirts, and I think much prettier and more graceful. Men, too, I'll bet, would like us in trousers." End quote. Great Britain's King George V joined Queen Mary in decreeing that no female horse rider can wear pants in the presence of the king or queen. Lady Greenall agreed, quote, "It certainly is a more pleasing sight to see a woman rider on the side saddle and dressed in feminine garb than to see her tearing along wearing man's clothing and seated in a man's saddle." End quote. Others did not agree with this view. 1914. Quote, "Women are suffering so much from wearing corsets and the freak fashions sent over from Paris that all members of the fair sex soon will be wearing trousers," declared Dr. Mary E. Walker. Dr. Walker was a most interesting person, having been a surgeon who treated the wounded during the Civil War and was the only woman to have received the Medal of Honor. In her later life, she was heavily involved in the women's suffrage movement. Quote, "Why, already you can see pictures of women wearing pants beneath their skirts." End quote. That is a Paris fashion, and it is a stepping stone to pants for women without a skirt over the pants. In this city today are thousands of women suffering all kinds of troubles because their mothers wore corsets. Quote, "Women are beginning to think now, and she soon will work out her own salvation and adopt the trousers. They are going to stop buying furbelows and buy food. They are beginning to learn the real purpose of dress. They are beginning to learn how hard it is for their husband to make money, and when they realize what fancy clothes cost, they will give them up." End quote. 1916. Women working during World War I were seen as the advent of something great. The vote and reform of continued restrictions on women. The change from skirt to trousers seen as an outerwear symbol of freedom. Women becoming part of the war effort were allowed the freedom to wear trousers that were neat, utilitarian, and efficient for the job that needed to be done. Quote, "Women in trousers became an accepted fact." End quote. But they didn't. Housewives already at home during the work and therefore not out in the open were wearing trousers and overalls. Why wear a dress you'll get dirty or be uncomfortable in when trying to complete chores? Quote, there is no reason why a girl should be ashamed of the fact that she possesses limbs. Everybody knows that she has them. End quote. Solidly still in World War I at this point, the newspaper article asks, quote, will these women go back to their former status and condition at the close of the war? No, they will not, and for two reasons. Because of the great dearth of workmen, due to the killing and crippling of millions in the war, the reopening of mills, factories, and workshops after the war will create an overwhelming demand for the services of women. Having had a taste of freedom and the satisfaction of wage earning, women, even if they could, would refuse to return to their old position of dependence and subjection. End quote. However, it's emphasized that dressing in the more utilitarian wear of trousers isn't going to make a woman into a man, and that, in fact, post-war, women will embrace who they each are and what fits their lifestyle and work. Perhaps that's trousers, but in a more womanly fashion. Quote, nor will the working woman in trousers ever meet with disrespect. No more, indeed, than the wise nurses in Serbia who, for sanitary purposes, have discarded the costume of the dove-necked nurse of romance. Indeed, men will appreciate the wisdom of a more utilitarian and sanitary garb for women as they work during the day. I can imagine that even within a few years, John Smith, out to dinner at a restaurant with his wife, will turn to his spouse and say, look, Mary, at that woman over there at the third table to the right wearing a skirt. Don't let me ever catch you doing it. How immodest and unfeminine. End quote. Well, it wouldn't come about quite so easily. 1920. The word in London, quote, a woman can wear practically what she likes so long as she looks nice. And some of them are going to wear pants. This is no idle talk. This is straight from the well-known feed box. Pants for women are to be fashionable. End quote. 1921. According to the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, who asked for opinions, quote, that all these matters of dress are matters of custom and opinion. I dare say that the appearance of a woman in khaki breeches on 2nd Avenue 30 years ago would have stopped traffic and called out the police reserves. Today, little is thought of such an appearance. My own view is that such dress is comfortable and hygienic, and that the woman will wear them at all times sooner or later, and that the world won't be a bit worse. End quote. That's from a doctor in Seattle. The Reverend Klein based his objections upon a verse in Deuteronomy, in which women who wear that which, quote, pertaineth to a man, end quote, are declared, quote, an abomination unto the Lord, end quote. Quote, let him forget Deuteronomy, end quote, declared the Reverend Chauncey J. Hawkins, pastor of Plymouth Congregational Church. Quote, let him forget and wear trousers if they want to. No harm in it, whatever, end quote. Mrs. Everett Smith, president of Young Women's Christian Association, quote, perhaps I am old-fashioned, but I believe in womanliness, and breeches are hardly womanly. I can't say I think that the question is one of morals. I am rather one of femininity, and I am mildly opposed to this tendency. End quote. 1921. Quote, I think that the knickerbockers that women are wearing on the street are a lot more respectable than some of the other clothes they are wearing. End quote. Major Guestford, superintendent of the Washington Police Force. Of course, if she were causing this disturbance, well, something might have to be done if, quote, she sought notoriety rather than comfort, end quote. The major spoke about the war effort, World War I, where women were doing men's work in overalls. And a champion to this, the aforementioned Dr. Mary Walker, is a friend of his as well. Interestingly, Dr. Walker was the only woman authorized by law to wear men's clothing in recognition of her services in the Civil War. She was working as a surgeon and had an easier time about it if she could wear a men's military uniform. But at certain soirees, including one at the White House, wearing a silk top hat and Prince Albert coat, she had to be asked to leave because of the attention. And other women had similarly caused stirs in Washington. Madame Maria Bochkareva, commander of the Russian Battalion of Death, visited President Woodrow Wilson during World War I and had short black hair with a full military uniform. Leola King, traffic policewoman, wore a man's uniform to perform her duties, and unfortunately she had more issues directing traffic because of the attention travelers paid to her wear. Apparently she had this position because of a shortage of policemen due to the war's draft. 1929. Paris is trying to work out an appropriate style for women to wear trousers, but still be considered a perfect lady and not shameful. At this time, the trouserette, as they were called, as they come to about the knee, will still have a skirt over them, but of course allow the freedom of movement that is desired. However, no one is sure that it will take off, as some similar types of outfits were created and didn't take off. But designers are still trying to find that perfect make. Shorter skirts with trouserettes of the same material, the skirt slit to show just a bit of the trouser. The intention is more for sporty ladies, but the hope is that the outfits will be generally adopted and embraced by active and working women. 1937. Marlene Dietrich, well-known actress, announced the point she made 4 years ago was proved. Quote, "I adopted this style because trousers are comfortable." End quote. She said, speaking of the summer of 1932 when her mannish attire shocked stylists and created international controversy. Quote, "I did not wear them, as many people have said, to attract attention. I never do anything for that purpose. Because they are comfortable. Women everywhere are wearing trousers today, but now they have another name. We call them slacks. If I lived in New York, London, or Paris, I don't believe I should ever wear slacks. But the informal atmosphere of Hollywood lends itself to sportswear of all kinds." End quote. Miss Dietrich said the style was not even her invention originally. Quote, "But somehow I was credited with it." End quote. 1940. Article title, European War Americanize Women's Wear. Per Miss Ruth Hutton of the Cooper Union, women will be wearing trousers for all occasions before the war is over. Frivolous items of dress like silly hats will be out. The call is for clothing that is functional and utilitarian and not just worn for sports. Quote, "Clothes are an expression of the times in which we live." End quote. In Europe, these changes are already being seen. 1941. What is the cause of more and more female slack wearers? Some say it's the influence of Hollywood moving across the country to the east. Others because of the presence of military work. Quote, "Women are expected to be more active, learning defense work, and the like." End quote. However, apparently still the true issue seems to be the need for the slacks to be flattering. Quote, "Bitter opponents of the slacks for women platform say that the girls just haven't the figures for trousers." End quote. I'm a country girl, so if you need a translator, that's figures. However, it seems that women are actively trying to make sure the slacks they select to wear are as flattering as can be. But still there are critics. Quote, "Too hefty, too short figures just weren't made for this type of thing. But the average woman with an average figure can look well in slacks if she'll use a bit of caution in their selection." End quote. And yes, this article provides several tips. Number 1, no tight slacks. No baggy slacks. Number 2, choose the fabric well. Number 3, please don't dash around town in slacks. Don't wear them when you go downtown shopping. Quote, "It's just too much." End quote. Quote, "We haven't advanced sufficiently to approve them on the city streets." End quote. Are you kidding me? Anyway. Number 4, decide what you'll wear with your slacks, because obviously topless isn't an option since we can't even be allowed to wear trousers. Number 5, take a good long honest look at your measurements. Quote, "Maybe it would be a better idea if you held off buying slacks until you lost that 10 pounds. Or maybe you're just a touch too short to achieve the proper effect." End quote. Yes, this article was written by a woman. Had this been a modern writing, I can imagine something like, "Damn, she thick." 1942. As men are being shipped off to military duty for World War II, women are more and more wearing trousers in their own duties and for relaxation. Quote, "Because of them, we feel free to walk, run, or jump." End quote. Quote, "If you were so endowed, accent that characteristic with slacks." End quote. I'm sorry, is that in reference to one's booty? Saucy. The question was if this was just a mere trend given the climate of the day, or was this a true new style? Seems we heard this during World War I as well. This article encourages perhaps for those reluctant to jump into pants to start off with something more lightweight, something paired with a jacket to cover the hips and those stubborn bulges. According to this columnist, an 85-year-old man who had just had eye surgery to repair his eyesight that had been deteriorated for 10 years was apparently appalled to see ladies out and about in trousers. He said, quote, "What in tarnation are all the women wearing men's pants for?" End quote. The answer? Quote, "There's a war going on. The men are fighting it, but they need help from their women folk. They need women who will roll up their sleeves and get to work. They need women who, for the duration, can work like men. Could women do these jobs not wearing pants? Maybe in some cases, not in others, but if it helps them psychologically, let them do it." End quote. Then the writer loses me as she says that this trend won't last because they really aren't becoming and should only be worn when it's practical to do so for the job the woman is doing. Quote, "So be patient, Grandpa. The girls will be back in dresses before long, and then you'll have real reason to be glad you got your sight back." End quote. Well, for a moment there, I felt the women's fight for pants surge forward and then fall back right over a cliff. The Ethics of Slacks by Arthur Bugs Bear. Not all women can wear slacks, but they all do. One of our better class of fashion experts states that wearing slacks is strictly between a lady's conscience and her mirror. That kind of contest has been going on for centuries and results in the narcissist complex. A lady with hips like a sack of potatoes can stand in front of her mirror for hours and convince herself that her reflection is an imposter. The difficulty with most of the slacks I have seen on Main Street is there is too much latitude and not enough longitude. 1943. But as you already know, not all women even at this point push for trousers. Merle Oberon, actress, said, quote, "A girl can stand at a lathe 8 hours a day. She can grease cars and motors, run a bus or streetcar, or run a riveting machine. If she thinks of herself as feminine, she will remain so. If she begins to be affected by that insidious feeling of mastery that can easily come with wearing trousers, women, and I mean all of us, will have lost their most valuable asset. Our world has made it necessary for women to wear these garments to perform their work, but they should be made aware of their danger. Soldiers and all the men in the armed forces don't like women in trousers or in masculine-looking clothes. Every actress who's gone on camp tours will tell you the same story, that the boys admire the wide droopy brims and clinging fitted feminine costumes. If women would realize that their most important weapon in the battle of life is their femininity, they wouldn't be so ready to throw it away for a false sense of importance gained through wearing pants. 1944. Female witnesses in a court trial appeared in court wearing slacks. Judge Eugene J. Sartorius ordered them to dress like ladies for all future court appearances. Allegedly, he told his clerk that it was hard to find who was the plaintiff and which was the defendant in a divorce case if both wore pants. Eye roll. Quote, "It's a strange contrast when our federal judges wear robes and women witnesses wear pants." End quote. Justice of the Peace of Pana, Illinois, Will F. Jordan, 73 years old, fed up with pants on women, raided his wife's closet while she was out of town, and donned on a Sunday dress and hat and headed to his office. On his way there, a group of police officers stopped him, calling him a dowdy pseudo-dowager, after they heard from a group of ticked-off women. Allegedly, the police officers told him to go on home and change. Quote, "It isn't right you impersonating a lady." End quote. His response? Quote, "That is just what I wanted you to say. Now maybe you'll arrest some of these women who are wiggling and waggling in breeches and charge them with impersonating a man." End quote. Then he continued on to his chambers and commenced to working. Obviously, it took some time, but trousers obviously became a thing, though I'm sure the old schoolers of those days were still anti-slacks. From the National Archives regarding Equal Rights Amendment, quote, 3 years after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, was initially proposed in Congress in 1923 in an effort to secure full equality for women. It seeks to end the legal distinctions between men and women in terms of divorce, property, employment, and other matters. It failed to achieve ratification, but women gradually achieved greater equality through legal victories that continued the effort to expand rights, including the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which ultimately codified the right to vote for all women. End quote. In just a couple of months will be the 100th anniversary of the first time the ERA was introduced in Congress. I'm not going to get into politics here, but you would do well to do a little look-see about why it still has not been ratified and still is not part of the Constitution officially. Very eye-opening. Hate giving y'all homework, but if you're still here, you must like to learn, and knowledge is power. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please consider liking and subscribing to this channel. See you!